Hello, I thought I'd give you some additional support since I've had a couple of questions from different tutors and different students around the essay that you need to submit for Child Psychology and Development 1. So the first thing to say is that of course there's that lecture recording in Unit 4 and so you can go back and re-watch that. It was 50 minutes exclusively on the 3 assessments for the course, including where we went through and talked not just about the task itself but also what the assessment criteria were and what was meant by the descriptors for each of those criteria. So I would recommend that you go back and re-watch that because it's probably going to answer many of your questions. But just to cover some questions for consistency's sake, the task is to write an essay identifying and exploring the factors impacting on children's psychological and physical development in the present day. And that is a development of what we've previously done, where in groups you looked at factors impacting on children's development in a particular period of history. And you of course have had the opportunity to learn about a number of these factors in the units that we've covered, but not the entire course will squeeze into this essay, of course. So here are some pointers. Firstly, you absolutely must start with that title that I've just read to you and with what the task is. It's an essay. It's asking you to write an academic piece in the same way you did for induction. The induction assignment was a different topic. It's got relationships because that was specifically about factors impacting on children's academic success. Outcomes, whereas this is actually about their psychological and physical development. They are different things, but of course you might want to draw upon some of the evidence that was contained within some of the reports that we looked at, such as closing the gap, things like that, if they are relevant, but they're not going to be relevant for many of you, and so you just need to draw upon that if you think it adds data or evidence to what you've gained from this course. The courses should all be informing one another, but they are distinct and separate. The second thing to suggest is that when you're actually writing this piece, I would keep a printed copy of the assessment criteria which we handed out to you in that assessment lecture. Keep it handy as you're writing, because that's what we're going to mark against. We're actually going to sit down, read your assignment, look at the originality score, look at your bibliography, and then we're going to begin reading the essay, and then we're going to be identifying where we think you've scored against those specific assessment criteria, and then as a result of the assessment criteria we'll be able to identify a best fit grade. So that's what we're marking against, so that's what you need to write with. And as I say, re-watch that lecture because I talk about what is meant by those criteria and what they look like in practice. So some other top tips: you need to make sure that the points that you make in your assignment have logic behind them. An essay is about pulling together what the reading tells you, but putting it in such a way that you are putting forward an argument, that you are making particular cases, and that you're identifying where there are inconsistencies in what you've read or the evidence that's out there. That exploring of the logic of the different arguments is quite important as a part of the academic process. That's what we call analysis, really. You need to make sure that your points come from the reading. The lectures and the activities that you've done have started you thinking about these particular aspects of children's development, and those readings are ones that you should be using. Some of the weaker induction assignments were ones where people had not used those most useful texts that we'd identified in the teaching of the induction course, that we'd put in the course guide on the Moodle page, that we'd given you in those reading packs. But where people did use those, they were obviously very strong sources. That's why we'd identified them for you. You've got an entire Moodle page full of references to key sources, key articles, sections from our core book, Doherty and Hughes, as well as other texts that we've touched upon, such as Crawley and Woolfolk, and a whole range of other sources that you can draw upon. You would be mad not to use those as the starting point and then try and find additional sources to add to them. So please make sure you do that. You need to think about a plan before you do any writing. You start with the reading, what the reading says, but you need to plan out the structure of your assignment. And many of the questions that have come to tutors have been around how many themes or key points should you make within this assignment. The essay is 1,500 words long, and you need to set aside a couple of hundred words at least for your conclusion, and maybe 150, could be 200 words, it's entirely up to you, for your introduction, where you'll define some key terms, and those definitions need to come from a good academic source or a dictionary or one of the texts that we've been recognising. And if you take away that 400 or so words, you're only left with 1,100. We're asking you to look, and the criteria are separate for the psychological factors and the physical development. So I would divide that 1,100 words in half. So you've got about 550 words for exploring the physical aspects and 550 words roughly for the psychological aspects. They might be, 501 on 600 on the other. It's entirely up to you. But when you think about it, 500 words is not a lot. It's a typed side of A4 if it's regular one-line spacing, or 2 handwritten sides. It's nothing really. So you need to be able to decide how many points you want to cover and still provide depth of argument and make useful and insightful, thoughtful comments about those factors that you've chosen. So it's quite clear that you can't cover all of the factors. You'll need to say in the introduction something about what the factors are, and the bigger range of them. You might mention a whole host of them and justify why you're going to focus on a smaller number. You could do 2 psychological factors and 2 physical factors. You might choose to do 3 and 2 or 3 and 3. That's stretching things a bit, I think, if you do 6, because you're going to have only a couple of hundred words for each under those circumstances. That's really going to be stretching you, less than 200 words each. So I would recommend 2 or 3, depending on your choice and whether you think they interrelate in some way, which means that you can write about them together as 2 factors but use fewer words. That's a decision you have to make. This is something that's about your judgment in your essay writing. There's not a right or a wrong way of doing it, but it could be that you try and cover too much, and that would be wrong, but somebody else might cover that number of factors and they may make that work. So it's not an absolute answer I can give you. But you want to make sure that you have explained why you're justifying, or you need to justify why you've chosen to focus on a small number of factors, and it's partly going to be about space, isn't it? Then the points that you make when you're addressing each factor, they need not to be the points that you just think off the top of your head, oh, that's what I'll talk about, or that's what I learnt about when I was doing my A-levels and my BTEC. That would be the wrong way of doing this. You need to start by reading and going back to the texts that we looked at for those areas in the course. The things that we've studied that aren't necessarily those areas, they will help inform your understanding of your reading around those factors. And then what you read about and the key themes that you highlight and identify, like we have done in the seminars and we did in induction, they will tell you what the key points are that you need to make within that section, within that paragraph or couple of paragraphs for the essay. So I would plan it out very structurally, 1,500 words, introduction, 150 words, conclusion, 200 words perhaps, 1,500 words overall, so there's 1,100 left. Right. That means I'm going to do 550 words on physical factors. I'm going to choose 2 factors. That gives me about 270 words on each. Out of that 270 words, the reading tells me that there's 3 key points that I need to make, and so I will put them in, and I will then give myself just under 100 words for each of those key points. But you also need to make sure that it flows. You don't want to feel like you've got cut and paste chunks. There needs to be some logic that runs through your essay, so that there's an argument, a discussion that's going on. The strongest essays will be ones where people have been critical of the sources that they're using. And some of you in your induction pointed out the datedness of some resources that you'd used. Sometimes you explained why it was still a justified resource to draw upon. That's great. Where you've got an older source, you might want to pair it with something that is a newer source, so you can show that something's still considered to be relevant in the present day, because that's what this essay is about, the present day. So recency is quite important, and some people came a little unstuck on that in induction. But you might also want to recognise where there are differences of opinion, and some people don't agree, or the evidence is different in one study to another around a particular factor, or maybe you think the factor is quite complex and you want to explain how we don't want to make generalised sweeping statements and you just want to show that you understand the subtlety of things. That's where some of the higher marks are, in those subtleties of understanding and logic, and that only comes from you having read really widely around the topic and discovered the different views that different authors might hold, or different research might have found, or the different ways that has been interpreted by different people. And it must be academic material. I don't want this assignment to have references to A-level texts or newspaper articles unless they are linked to current strong academic sources. You've got a whole library of resources plus a massive material on the Moodle page where I've scanned readings for you. All of those readings will be appropriate and could and should be things that you should draw upon if they relate to the areas that you're looking at. The last point I want to make is that you're not handing in a draft for this. You are talking about it in the seminars, but most important of all, you've already had feedback on your induction assignment, which is really recent feedback. That's feedback that's come to you in the last week. So you should be using that feedback and those points that you've identified and put in your academic development plan, and they are the things that you know when you've written your draft or you're writing your draft that you need to be working on. When you've done your draft, please make sure you check it in relation to those targets. For example, if you know you're struggling with proofreading, ask someone who has not had comments about needing to proofread your assignment. I would also suggest that you need to make a point of putting at the top of your assignment just a sentence to say, feedback on my induction assignment asked me to work on the following aspects. Because if you do that at the top of your assignment, it won't be included in the word count. We can then do what we did when we gave you your final feedback. We can actually comment on those things that are your targets and how you've progressed with those, or we won't know who you are when we mark them, but we can say whether or not that's still an issue, or whether or not you've done really quite well in that area, or what you still specifically need to work on. It just means we can give you more targeted and personalised feedback and feed forward, because this is going to then feed into the next piece that you submit in the same way that the induction assignment did for this. Hopefully that's brought some clarity. Yeah, good luck.